favor. This is One More, please. Hello, and welcome to Otra, por favor.
Otra, por favor.
One more, please.
Episodio número 41.
41.
Yeah,
Let's go.
'cause
Let's do
40 was Michelle. Michelle, shout out. And then 41, we have a very special guest. She has done some incredible work in our community. I've followed her ever since we started the podcast. I ran into MAS Cultura, and I started seeing the lowriders. But I started seeing more than just lowriders. I started seeing like how there was a creative part behind it and how there was space for a lot of people. But the one person that's behind all of that great work is Mónica Maldonado. Mónica Maldonado, welcome to Otra, por favor.
Bienvenida.
Bienvenida, welcome.
Epa!
Let's go.
Thank you for having me. I'm just saying the intro is a vibe itself. Like I feel at home. So
Oh, yeah. Hopefully made you feel at home.
yeah, so Mónica Maldonado, the founder of MAS Cultura.
MAS
How,
Cultura.
how are you today, Mónica?
I'm excellent. Gracias.
Good, thank you. Thank you for being here. And on our podcast, we have David, as usual,
Hello.
and Coque.
Coque, Jorge
There.
Martinez.
We're part of the team, Otra, por favor, and we like talking about football, vida and cultura, and I mean, just the name of MAS Cultura, we had to bring you in. Can you share a little bit more of your background, and before we talk about MAS Cultura, talk more about like where you're from originally, and like say if you lived in Austin, if you were born here, or did you move here? Can you just share more about your life and let the people know like more about you?
Yeah, sure. So I actually have been living in Austin my entire life. I moved here, well, my parents brought me here when I was a month old from San Antonio. So we have like this running joke with the family that that I have a little bit of resentment about leaving San Antonio because I think I would have made the perfect mi tierra girl. So both of my parents, they immigrated from Mexico, from Coahuila, Piedras Negras, Allende, Musquis, that area. And so came to San Antonio. My dad obviously is a construction worker. And then when I was a month old, we moved to Austin. So I've been in Austin since I was a month old.
Wow.
You told me Tierra, that's the restaurant, the famous one, right? Okay.
Yes.
The one with all the piñatas and
The piñatas,
Oh.
the pan
Panadería.
dulce.
the mariachi.
Yes.
Well, you came to Austin, and we're lucky to have you here.
I know.
So
We could have missed out if you weren't here.
I know.
Yeah, so thank you to your parents that brought you here, yes.
So it's my sister's family. They're actually her in-laws. They're from Piedras Negras, and they have a pretty extended family. You probably have heard of the last name Marines.
I have not heard Marines.
No, okay.
No.
That's them right there. So FYI.
Actually, that's a really very unique last name. I
Yeah.
haven't heard that last name before either.
Yeah. So it's funny because my sister's last name is Marines. So it's spelled Marines. So we grew up where we say, "Hey, Bernice Marines."
Yes. Well, and also like we have several last names. You know?
True.
We have like
It's
3 or 4.
like-
It's never just one.
Like de Castillo de la Garza, Maldonado. You're just like,
The Castillo.
so, you know.
Yeah.
We need like 2 driver's license for the whole last name, so because they don't fit.
So you were born in San Antonio. You moved here to Austin when you were 1 month old. Which neighborhood did you grow up on?
Yeah, so when my parents moved us to Austin, we moved to the Old Torf area, so South Austin, right? And we actually, our first home was in these apartments that are right at the corner of South 5th and Old Torf. And then eventually we moved out of the apartments and we lived on South 2nd. And I lived 4 different houses on the same block because anytime the rent went down, my mom's like, we're moving.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we just always moved, and it was always on that same street on South 2nd. So if you're not familiar with Old Torf or South 2nd, Basically, it's Old Torf, South First, Gillis Park is there, which is a park that's kind of gone unnoticed over the past few years. But back then, it was really a hub. And also, it was kind of referred to or tied into that whole Keep Austin Weird vibe. But yes, like that's the area I moved and grew up at, was South Austin.
That keep Austin weird. It's so when I moved here, or like the north part of Austin was completely different to the south part of Austin. For me, like I've always thought of the north part more business oriented, more industrial, more like Houston. But the Keep Austin Weird part is like down south. But you were Chaparro. You lived in East Austin.
I lived in East Austin
a while
for maybe like about 6 years when I got here, I think, and I basically hang out there. That was my area too. Like you said, that was kind of like the hood for me. Yeah.
Monica, could you tell us a little bit about your family? I know you said immigrant parents moved to San Antonio, eventually moved to Austin, but do you have any siblings, and what was it like growing up in South Austin?
So, when my parents moved us to Austin, we were still like, first generation. So there were kids that were bilingual. But we definitely were like that household that was listening like to norteño music, like eating beans and rice every day or whatnot. And they're definitely like with that upbringing of really being in a household where like every summer they put you on the bus and was like, you're going to Mexico for the summer with your abuela.
Yes,
right?
Yes, of course.
And things of that nature. There always definitely was like, we're different, right? Because we knew that other households, it was just different for them, right? Like they listened to rock and roll, and I remember me being like, "Who's John Mellencamp?" Like we listened to Ramon Ayala, right? And
Tragos de Amargo Licor.
Yes. So definitely, even at a very young age, like I knew, like, hey, we're immigrants, and plus that, like, there was this sense of fear that we lived in and day out because my parents were undocumented. So when I was young, they were going through that process of becoming legal residents. So there was always like this fear, like what's going to happen? And of course, it also made money constraints very tight because we knew like the money that was being earned was going towards an attorney. Like I remember us being a kid and like driving to San Antonio to go make the payment to the attorney and like that being a priority, right? As to where like other kids were like at Toys R Us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the truth. And so there were a few other kids in the neighborhood that were first generation also, but for the most part, it was like second or third generation.
Gotcha.
So you grew up where, did your parents knew English when you grew up or no?
So no, my parents did not speak English. And I have one sibling. Okay. So I have an older brother. And my brother actually is disabled. And so yeah, as far as that goes, yeah, they did not speak English. So for me, it was also like, translating and just like, and I say it now, but like sometimes feeling embarrassed, right? Oh, my parents, I'm not going to invite them to this field trip because
they don't know what's going to happen.
because they're not going to know how to talk or communicate with other parents.
Right.
So I think definitely, as far as that goes, that was just part of my childhood, right? And it is something that even now I spoke to a group of kids in Dove Springs late last year, and it was really interesting because I talked about my upbringing and talked about being embarrassed about speaking Spanish, and they were all like just nodding their heads, like
it just resonated with them.
Like,
it really
touched them. I know what you mean. And I think that's a really important thing. And as we're, through my organization creating our programming, that definitely is one of the things that we want to make sure that we nurture and let these kids know, right? Like, hey, we know what that feels like. And it's not anything to be embarrassed about. It builds character, and it's part of who we are.
For sure. I think it's a wonderful point, and one that really resonates with me as well. I'm a first generation Mexican American, and everything you said as far as like translating for your parents and feeling that embarrassment, feeling that just like not fully American, not fully fitting in. Looking back at it, you realize how blessed you were to share that dual nationality as an American and as a Mexican, as a Latino. So it's cool that you get to go back and talk to these kids and have the message that really resonates. And kind of leading me into this next question, like what brought you to your organization and got you to do the type of work you're doing now?
Sure. So I actually have always loved art, and in my mid-20s really got introduced to a lot of music. I worked at an organization, and the director there, she was a music enthusiast. So she would bring me music, and she would just slap CDs on my desk and be like, hey, listen to this. And so over the year, as I went into my 20s, I kind of had strayed from art, even though I definitely had an appreciation for it. But music kind of had became like the center of, one of my passions or whatnot. Anyhow, I ended up moving to Phoenix for a job assignment. When I went to Phoenix, I signed for 2 years. Was a recent empty nester, and I was like, sure, like why not, try this out. So I took the position, and I remember arriving to Phoenix, and there were just brown people everywhere.
That's good.
Right? And it was so interesting because I remember arriving, and I think a lot of people were like, "Ahí está mamona," right? Like, "Oh, Austin is so cool. It's so impressive." And then I got there, and I was like, maybe not."
No, definitely.
Maybe not. And I was really, I was blessed because I was planted in a neighborhood that was adjacent, actually not adjacent. It was at the doorstep of the light rail. And they were revitalizing that area and creating an art district.
Oh, cool.
And for me, and I've probably told this story a million times, for me, like the moment that I'll never forget, like it's like yesterday, is I had this studio that faced the light rail. It was like floor to ceiling windows, and they're having their first Friday, which is like they block off seven streets, and every space is exhibiting art. And I'm looking out the window, the light rail pulls up, and I just see all these people getting off the light rail. And they were of like every socioeconomic background, every color, like it was so diverse. And I remember I just started crying because I was like, wow, the power of art.
Of course.
Like to bring people together, right? And then I really just started exploring and it was like a rebirth for me and a reintroduction to art. It was really just acknowledging not just the power of art, but actually going downstairs and being like, okay, let's see what the hype is all about. And seeing myself in the art. And understanding that that's why people knew or felt comfortable in the space and wanted to be a part of it because, they could see themselves in it. And when I came back to Austin, like the first thing I did was like, oh, I'm going to go look for our art district. And I remember like driving around all day and then being like, oh, I don't think we have an art district.
We have the I love you sign.
Right? I was like, there's not an art district. But I think more than anything, I really had like this identity crisis where I just felt like, where are other people that look like me and where are we celebrating culture? And it became like clear, like really quickly that those spaces really didn't exist. And then more so that the art that I was seeing, and even though I do appreciate it, right, that it was pop art and it wasn't really storytelling and I couldn't really see myself in it. And that was something that it definitely in Phoenix, through downtown, through, almost anywhere you went in Phoenix, you would see art that really represented all cultures. And I think in Austin, other than, what was already up, it really hadn't gone anywhere. And a lot of it had gone away.
That's sad.
And it's like, say, for example, one part where I do see like there's a lot more push for art, even in the neighborhoods. It's East Austin. It's always everyone. I lived in Houston for some time, and I remember everyone always talked about Austin as being this artsy place where you go and you express yourself through art. And I'm like, okay, I see it, but then I only see it like in a certain way. But like you said, you don't really see it in the way where it represents you. It represents your culture. It represents, like us. It doesn't talk about like our stories, like you were saying. A lot of that is could just be something like someone came up with a concept, but it wasn't something like say, for example, I'm gonna do this cup and that's it. But there's no meaning behind a cup. That's what I would see. It was, a lot of it was some pretty cool things. For a lot of it was just like splashing of paint in the canvas, and this is art. And I'm like, what? Where's the story behind that? And then there's nothing wrong with that because you're still, doing something creative. But I think like say when it comes up to like us and our art, it has more meaningful because a lot of the because of the struggles that we've had, because of the situations we've lived. I mean, if we look at back from the 70s to I don't know how it's right now, but in California, for example, how the lowrider culture was huge, and the graffiti culture was huge. And all of that has to do with the actual reality of the society and in that moment itself. So, and then we come here and then we start seeing, like more murals about like, you actually, now they encourage it. When back in the days, it's kind of like, it's actually wrong to paint on walls. But there was an article that I read from you there. You're saying that you grew up from a single mother that was an immigrant mother, right? What can you take from that, like, for yourself, and how that, like, and talk about like you're actually translating for your mom. How can you correlate all of that aspect of your childhood into art? Like,
well, I will say, first of all, so I know at the beginning we talked about my mom and my dad coming to Austin from San Antonio. So eventually my dad did return to Mexico. Okay. But that in itself, it's a whole nother story. But as far as like growing up with the single mother and how that correlates to art, right? I think for me, it's her work ethic, right? So the work ethic definitely is something that seeing her drive to make her dream come true is something that I definitely say, is within me because of me, witnessing that. So I'm not actually an artist. Like, I don't paint, right, or anything like that. So I always tell people, I feel like I'm more of a visionary.
La jefa.
That too. But I think for me, it was just really seeing that my mom worked really hard, right? 3 jobs. But money never defined us, right? And I think, like, if we're really talking about, like, how I take my upbringing and how art mirrors that, right? I think that art allows you to be who you are. It doesn't have to define you. You get to define it. Right. It's a form of expression. And for me, I just feel like the work ethic that my mom had to make her dream come true, that's embedded in me, right? And so that's my fuel to create. Yeah.
Wonderful. So you're a visionary, you're an art collector, you're an organizer. Can you give a little bit more description of what you do to our audience? Because, I mean, we've said all these things, and they're all, like, a lot of great things, but, like, take me on a day by day of Monica.
So I will tell you, I have a daytime job. I work full time where I get a paycheck. Right. And that has afforded me, the liberty to do MAS Cultura, and also the freedom to say, like, what I do and don't want to do.
There we go.
I think that's very key, because one of the things that a lot of young people struggle with, and I struggled with as well, is like, what I'm studying or what I'm trying to do has to be my passion, and that pressure to just figure it out by the time you turn 21 or 22, when a lot of times you end up finding your passions later in life, or having a job or some type of career that helps you sustain yourself and live the life you want to live, as well as pursue your passions on your own time. You know what I mean? So I think it's key, your message, and it's inspiring to hear, especially in the sense where you said that you really get to connect people and create those bonds in the community in ways that allow people to express themselves fully, especially our communities, people that look like us, and, that representation aspect I feel is super key.
¿Qué fue lo que hizo que te encontraras con MAS Cultura, o MAS Cultura te encontrara a ti?
No, super pregunta. ¿Quieren en inglés o en español? Or Spanglish?
Whatever.
A ver.
Yeah.
Okay. So, MAS Cultura, I told y'all the story about coming to Phoenix and, identity crisis. And I had this really cheesy idea that I was going to bring Latina women together and do this thing called comadres.
Comadres.
Yes. And then I remember a friend of mine, she's actually from Del Rio, Denise Quintanilla. And she's like, not everyone's going to understand what comadres means. And she's like, I don't know about that name. And so I was like, okay. So her and I on a Sunday ended up at the park, at Chicano Park. And when I went to the park, what I saw were men that were leaders and that really wanted to get involved with the community, but didn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm going to help them. Right. And so that was not an easy thing to do, by the way. Like, I had to earn those stripes, that respect, right? Because at first they're like, who's this chick, right? Well, like, what does she want from us?
I remember you telling me that
Yes,
whenever
right?
I met you.
And I think the lesson with how MAS Cultura came about tiene mucho que ver that I had to spend time in the community to really identify what the need was, right? And then see how I could show up for it. So just having like this idea of doing something because I thought it was cool, comadres, right? Like that shit wasn't going to cut it. And so through serving the community, which includes showing up at the park, but other things too, right? Was where I was like, okay, my organization cannot just be about Latina women. And I actually was really intimidated about launching an organization. And so for a while, I was kind of like self-funding some things or doing raising money through the community. And then I started getting a lot of pressure because I had already started a rumor that I was going to start a nonprofit. And people started asking me like, hey, when are you starting this nonprofit? And I was really stuck because I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to call it. And I remember going home and pulling all my books out off my bookshelf and starting to read through my books, Chicano history and just Rodolfo and I, like every book. And I was like, surely the name is just going to pop out at me,
Some
right?
type of inspiration.
Yes. And I have all the books spread out and I was like, yeah, this is not working. And hubo un momento that I was like, well, let me just get a piece of paper and a pen and write down, like, what is this about? And I was like, music, ¿verdad? Because music, it's part of our cultura, bringing people together, obviously art. And then I was like, in everything I do, I want to put my soul into it, right? And then I was like, oh, MAS Cultura. And that's kind of how, like, I gave birth to the name.
Perfecto.
And then I had the name, but I still had not formalized the nonprofit. And again, through serving in the community, right, I was like, and really learning about just the politica and how things work in the city, I was like, yeah, we need funding. Like, we deserve to have a piece of the pie. And the only way that's going to happen is if I do this nonprofit thing. And so that's when I knew like MAS Cultura definitely like it was going to happen. And I would share it with people at the park or where I volunteer in Dust Springs. And people would they loved it.
Llamativo, muy llamativo.
Oh, yeah, de
It caught
volada.
fire.
Because it was like, oh, más.
Más.
Y más,
Más.
queremos más
Right.
cultura.
Right.
And what
Yeah,
does the acronym mean? You know, music, art, and soul.
Music,
So,
art, and soul.
fue algo muy natural. Yeah, when I had it on a piece of paper, I was like, that's it.
Comadre, comadre.
And comadre.
Y eso que dices, eso salió básicamente de hacer estas conexiones con personas y empezar a buscar ahí, especialmente en Chicano Park, y tratar de involucrarte con la comunidad. Fue lo que te hizo querer más.
Eso fue parte, ¿verdad? Porque lo que yo miraba cuando yo iba al parque era, you know, the respect, the dedication, how they would show up for each other, ¿verdad? The sense of, you know, familia. And in a way I felt like, I mean, I'm just going to use the word, like they were unseen, unheard. That word's like underrepresented, but you know, I don't know if it really works in this context. But I definitely felt like they were misunderstood, and I knew that because I was there spending time with them, and I was learning their stories and the inspiration behind the cars and everything else, right? But that's just one group, right? I mean, I serve at a pantry in Dove Springs, and you know, we see the elders that come through, and I'd be, you know, handing a box of food over, and I would always be really like taken back, right, by like the tone of the skin, like these beautiful, everyone's a different brown, and I would like pay attention to that and the wrinkles, and I'd be like, I want to know, like, how did they end up here? ¿Cómo llegaron aquí? And what's their story? So all of that. So it's not just one group.
Yeah.
And then, of course, my own personal, like knowing that my mother came and she was, you know, her legacy. And then what is that for me? And then how do we continue that?
When you created MAS Cultura, was it all you creating the organization itself, like yourself, or did you have a team that helped you put everything together?
I know it was me.
Okay.
I do have some people that I definitely brainstormed with, right? I have a friend, Ernesto Cheche Hernandez. He's from El Paso, Chuco town. And he's a brilliant artist, right? And he was definitely one of those people that I confided in and would share, like, yo, ¿qué onda? Right? And he felt it too. So it was a very safe place for me to share those ideas, because honestly, a lot of people thought I was crazy. Like, I remember doing my first event and the guys at the park being like, "You're gonna do what?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna do like this photo shoot, and it's gonna be all women photographers, and we're gonna lift up Latinas in your cars." And I remember being like, nobody's going to come. And I'm like, well, you're going to come, right? you're bringing in the car. So there was definitely a lot of, you know, people who doubted me. And so Ernesto definitely, you know, all my respect, my love to him, like, you know, as a brother, as someone that I was definitely able to bounce ideas and confide in, and he believed in me since day one.
So you were saying something that's very, very, I would say, in a lot of, even like in the Latino culture, the one, like, we have so many good things, but we also have some stuff that we can work on. One of them is whenever someone's starting something new, whenever someone's starting something that's going to bring something different to the table, you're going to be seen as the, ¿qué trae esta pues? But the fact that you kept going at it, eventually as people catch on, they're going to see, like, it's not just a hype. Like, right now, it's not just for the hype, or it's not just for the trend or for the follows, but actually because you want to show something. And then they started seeing what you were doing, but they started seeing their stories being portrayed through everything else that you were doing. For example, the photo shoot with the cars and the Latino, like the all women photographers. That's at first it was, I can imagine like the guys were like, pues acá, mijo, cómo hace esa cosa? But
Yeah, and the thing too, it's like being a female, right?
Yeah.
So I'm showing up at the park, and then it's like the señoras, respectfully, right? They're like, what's up with this chick, right?
Yeah.
And
like you see them go like this.
yeah, so and again, going back, like my first day at the park, there's like this tent, and there's, the jefas, they're sitting there, and I'm introducing myself to everyone, talking to them about this project, and I make my way there, and of course they're like, yeah, like, who's this chick? And I was like, I have this idea, like, I want to do this photo shoot, and it's going to be about lowriders, I'm going to have music, da-da-da. And, they kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And I was walking off, and one lady came up to me, and she chased me down, and she's like, hey, mija. And she's like, give me your number. She's like, anything you need, I got you.
She's the one that believed in you.
Yeah, and I said, oh, okay. And her name's Yolanda. So she died from COVID. And I remember about a day later, I get this text on my phone, and she's like, hey, homegirl, what's up? And I'm like, okay, who's this? Right? And I'm like, what's up, homegirl? And it was Mandy, her daughter. She's a female Latina lowrider. So she has a car that hops. She's with High Class worldwide. And she believed in me since day one, too. And she was one of those, like, anything you need, I got you.
That's good.
I'm pretty sure you probably hesitated, or, when you were planning that event, it was something new, and it was something that a lot of people were just like, iffy about. But you got access to the one person that probably knows people and has connections. So they saw something in you that actually you were doing something beneficial, and you come in, and then look where you're at now. Like, look at all the great things that's going on after that one particular decision.
I think one important thing I definitely want to say is that that's important is that you have to do it whether people believe in you or not, right? Like, and that's still how I feel sometimes. Like, I'm still going to do it. Like, whether you're behind me or not, I'm still going to do it because it's in my heart. It's in my soul. And I think that that's important, right? Like, no te esperes. Like, the haters are going to be there. The doubters are going to be there. But no matter what, whatever it is that you want to create, bring to life, just do it, right? And don't wait on anyone or anybody. And it's been interesting because everything that's happened, like, it just keeps multiplying itself.
Right.
and it's like what you're putting out, right? And for me, it's like at the end of the day, people can feel what is real, right? Whether it's like you're working in a small space, like this feels real, right? It's real. But, like, let's suppose Yolanda would have never came up to me. Guess what? I still would have done it. I would still would have done it. Yep. And if 5 people would have showed up, 5 people would have showed up. But more than 5 people showed up. And I remember people just coming to the event and being like, how the hell did she get all these people here? And you want to know how? Because I'm not scared to do the work. And that's another very important thing, like the hustle. I remember going and printing flyers and going block walking and hand delivering, like, this is my event, and it'd be really important. Like, it'd mean a lot. Yep. One of the things for me is, like, we have to include our gente, and, like, what does that mean? Raza, hood, whatever you want, however you want to refer to it, right? But I started off there. Obviously, I live in Dove Springs. My mom lives in Dove Springs, right? So we eventually made our way to Dove Springs. So back in the day, it was like the further you got from downtown, like I remember us thinking Belichick, like that neighborhood was the rich people and would go trick-or-treating there.
Get the good candy.
Right, like
The Reese's Pieces.
yeah. And so when I was 18, my mom ended up buying a house. We ended up buying a house actually in Dove Springs, which my mom still lives in the house. So as far as like, yes, I started off with passing out flyers there in my old neighborhood off South 2nd and Old Torf. And as far as like the neighborhoods that I'm working in, and definitely want to leave a footprint and be like, hey, MAS Cultura is here, is Dove Springs for sure. And then the other neighborhoods that have been identified as underserved and high population of Latinos are Del Valle, Montopolis, and Rumburg. So the goal is that now that MAS Cultura is official and as we, work on getting funding, that our programming goes into these areas that are predominantly Latino.
Monica, I see your hesitation to use certain buzzwords, and I resonate with that a little bit. But I think the discomfort, at least on my end, comes from when people don't. They just say it without the action behind it. But you're a person of action. You do a lot of things for the community. You built that trust over the years and those relationships, like you said. And you speak a lot about certain places that are special that I don't think a lot of Austinites, like new Austinites, like I've been here for 10 years, but still
You're new.
I'm new. You know what I'm saying? I'm still new. So no, but these places are very special to you, and you see them as like a place where magic can happen that maybe can bring you to tears and can create that friendship for life. You spoke about that community in Phoenix with the art district right by the rail, and you've been here. You mentioned Gillis Park. Can you tell us about some other areas that are key to you at the moment that you've hosted a lot of events or you see yourself actively working at?
Yeah, I can talk about Olin and Peyton Road.
That's down the street?
That's down the street. And I was invited to do a mural there. And it was to honor Adelino, who's the paletero who was assaulted and then died.
Yeah.
And that's a space, right? Like that's very special in my heart. I went there. It's not my neighborhood. And I went there and I remember when we were going to start the mural, it was another one of those like, and I think this is kind of, now that I'm talking about it out loud, it's a reoccurring thing, right? Like where you enter and then we're like, who are you and what are you doing here and what do you want from us? Right? And I remember us going to prep the wall and realizing that there was a lot of pain in that community and that there was a lot of animosity between brown and black people. And I remember the next day, I was like, okay, I got to get to know the people in the neighborhood. I walked around or they'd come up. I'd make sure, introduce myself. And the people who lived in the neighborhood that are Latino, a lot of them are undocumented. And a lot of them were sharing stories about being robbed, being scared, being harassed. And at that moment, I was like, oh, this needs to be bigger than just doing this mural. And we ended up getting a DJ, bringing in mask and socks. And then we ended up deciding we were going to raise some money to give to the family of the paletero. So we did some raffle items. But I have this really wonderful picture that's one of my favorites, where by the end of the event, there is a man in the neighborhood, and he's Mexicano, and he's dancing a cumbia with an African-American lady from the community. And that, to me, is a really powerful moment. And it I still know, like, I'm going to return to that neighborhood And so anyone who is in North Austin, right, like there's a lot of ways that you can serve and healing that needs to happen, right? And North Austin, to me, it's like that's where all the paisanos are at, the best tacos, you know, Charlie's. I know what's up. I know where the good tripas are at, too. But I think, yeah, like every space, for me, anywhere there's Latinos, like it's special. And I can think about all of them and share something like.
Yeah. Have you ever thought, maybe you already have, but created some type of map, something interactive, something where it's like, all right, these are some cool spaces of things going on in these neighborhoods. And like you say, there's a lot of places to serve. But for example, me, like if I had the curiosity, if there was some type of platform or something available like that.
I think we eventually will work towards that. Yeah. I am really excited to share that the Austin Justice Coalition has launched a new program. And their program is basically they're taking ambassadors in each district, and that ambassador, because Austin Justice Coalition's been, a lot of their work has been in East Austin, right? And we can touch more about East Austin and that. But Austin Justice Coalition has launched this program called DOPE. They have ambassadors. And when I knew that was coming and I saw the call for it, application, I reached out to a young man that lives in North Austin. And I said, Julio, you have to apply for this, right? You got to represent for our gente. And like many of us, we don't think we're qualified, right? And that is one of those things that I'm trying to break, like that mentality, like I'm not qualified enough. Right. And like I even tell the artists that I work with and told Julio, like, yo, like we can't be bitching, like we're not getting funding or we're not getting, you know, these opportunities if we're not applying. Yep. So apply. And he did apply. And so Julio Herrera is the ambassador for that district. That's good. And so I think that program is going to do a good job of trying to kind of centralize like opportunities to serve in each district. But as far as MAS Cultura goes, you know, it's definitely not going to happen this year. But I think eventually, yes, like because, you know, one of our goals is to be the bridge. Right. Like that is in our strategic plan. Like we are the bridge between communities and the resources that make them thrive. Right. Yeah. So eventually I would love that. Right. Which kind of leads me like, you know, building a team like that is coming where we're going to put a call out and say, hey, we got to build a team. Like I definitely can't do this alone. I have a wonderful board and there are some volunteers that, you know, have been showing up consistently. But we are finally getting prepared to do this launch where we're, you know, we have, you have to excuse me. So we actually got this we're granted a pro bono through JDI Marketing. It's a very generous, and they're working on our, you know, branding, verbal, visual. Oh, wow. Yeah, all this fancy stuff. Yeah. Like nice. Boilerplate, index, all this stuff. Yeah, so I know. So it's all in the works, but by, you know, I would probably say in the next 90 days, we probably will be launching something and say, hey, we're building a team. Who wants to be part of it, right?
That's what I was going to ask you. So MAS Cultura, does it have like members right now? Does it have a team that it's actually work together?
We are recruiting, Chaparro, if you are interested.
This is actually your job interview, Chaparro.
Yeah. Tell me how's he doing?
So far, since there's no tequila, you have all failed.
Man. Oh, man. Hey, I have some gin over here.
But, yes, we're going to be building a team, the organization, like, definitely, like, I want it to be Latino-led organization. And to be honest, like, I really see myself eventually handing it off. Like, if I'm being, like, straight up, right? Like, I feel like I gave birth to it. It has a solid foundation. And I want to hand it off. And I really want to see like the younger generation take it and run with it and build it. Yep. And me support that.
And it's like, say for example, as we see more of this younger generation actually wanting more representation. If you look at a lot of the outfits in Austin, for example, a lot of that is based on our culture. A lot of, like the las guayaberas and everything that people wear. There's a trend right now. It's actually people that we grew up with for years. So, and because of what has happened in America and with politics and, immigration and whatnot, you get more people that actually want to be knocking on doors and, want to be part of it. And like you said earlier, you don't get, for us, if you want change, you got to be the one doing the application. Like I always have the saying, si Muhammad no va a la montaña, you have to be the one that goes to the mountain, and you have to be the one knocking on doors if you want to change. If you don't want to change, you want to be complaining, there's Twitter, there's Facebook. But if you really want something done, like do similar to what you were doing, get involved in the community.
Yes, for sure. And I think an important thing about getting involved, right, and engaged and whatnot, I really want MAS Cultura to be that space where people feel like they don't have to overcommit, right? Because I think that's a really scary thing. Like it was for me for a long time. Like I didn't want to volunteer because I was like, well, how many hours and like when, and how much money, all these things. So I think too, like we need to know like, hey, I can show up and I can just do maybe 2 hours a month or 4 hours a month, right? And like that's okay. Like to do that. And I think sometimes we just have this fear of commitment. And that same fear of commitment, the fear of not feeling like you're not qualified, all those things really keep us from being involved and engaged. So yeah, like don't overthink it. MAS Cultura makes it easy, but I think a lot of other organizations do too, right? Like if you say, hey, I only have 2 hours to give. I know I was working with the UT student and she's like, I'm working on my master's, but I really want to get involved because I think our soul needs it, honestly. Like, lo necesitamos. Like I go and do things and sometimes I'm like, wow, like that just gave so much more to me than I think I gave to it. And so I remember telling her, like I'll send you the strategic plan, just pick. Like what you can give to and how much. And I think that's really how we're going to advance as Latinos in Austin. I think we're our own enemies right now because we're not collaborating enough. I think that we really just have to reach out more and be like, hey, how do we collaborate and coming together? Yeah, like just carve time out of your life and day, and trust me, it's gonna be very rewarding. Right. Even like when we did the Dons y Doñas with the socks and stuff, and we went and handed those out, right? Yeah, it just really feels
rewarding.
Yeah, rewarding to do that.
Yeah, even I know for me is a lot of the times like a lot of the photography I've done is right now is volunteering. And sometimes you get tired. It's like, like for me, I'm blessed to get access to shoot at a stadium now. But however, one thing that I've always thought of myself is like, if I don't do it, someone else is going to do it. Or like, say, for example, when it comes up to representation, if we don't do the work, if we don't put in the work, someone else is going to do it. It's not going to be as accurate, and we're going to be complaining about this person doing it wrong. Instead of us actually doing it, to take the spaces that, that are art, us speaking of our culture, representing our culture, helping our community, that's our work.
We should be telling our own stories, right?
Right. And then it's up to us to be that part, like be there as face of representation.
Right. Take ownership of our own stories,
right,
and accountability.
Right. Because a lot of times what I hear is people complain about someone doing our work. We want representation, but we're afraid to step in the places.
And that for me, probably as a curator, as a person who organizes, is probably the most challenging, right? It's like, how do I bring it all together, right? So how do I bring young Latino professionals together with like Julian, who is from the hood? And how do I do that? I've kind of feel like I've been successful at it because the events that I have hosted always feel very diverse, and I do feel like everyone's represented and everyone is welcomed into those spaces.
But I'm glad that through your work, you're able to work down to kind of break down biases and stereotypes and create a true diverse environment that really tries to bring in voices of all socioeconomic backgrounds. It's and I've always felt that a little bit weird about Austin in particular, because I growing up in Houston, it's a larger city to me, more diverse. So when I went to UT, immediately it was just a shock of white, you know, like just different culture, bam, culture shock. And, you know, kind of like Richie was saying earlier, oh yeah, Austin's a progressive city, it's artsy, it's this and that. But like you were saying, is nothing like being surrounded by all shades of brown, all shades of color, and all different stories.
I mean, I'll tell you right now. But at the end of the day, like, what I am proud of is that I can bring, like, I can do that.
Yeah.
But that's because I spend a lot of time, honestly, like, checking on everybody and like, yo, are you good? Kivo, what's up?
That's good.
It takes a lot of energy. So so what do you do to kind of relax and just like ground yourself after, you know, such high strung environment, talking to everybody, maintaining relationships?
Yes, it is a lot of energy. You know, I meditate. I, you know, stay in prayer. I also, you know, those are going to be the two things, you know, meditating, staying in prayer. You know, listen to a lot of music. I do suffer from, and I just learned this word, the fear of missing out, FOMO. Yeah, I do suffer from that.
No, it's
a
real thing.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
Yeah, it is a real thing. But for me, yes, it is definitely a lot of energy that I, you know, exchange. But at the end of the day, like, carving out that time, again, meditating, staying in the Word, you know, whatever your belief system is. Like, I honestly, a lot of the things that have happened, you know, with MAS Cultura, I do really feel like it's the force of the universe. It is God, like, using me as a vessel. And I say that because, I mean, I've received messages at midnight of people saying, like, hey, like, I just saw this post of yours and I want to be part of it. And I had a young lady message me the other day. She messaged me through Instagram. The other one was through text. But she said, I'm so excited to go to the Cesar Chavez March. She's like, I'm from Abilene. And it reminded me of my LULAC days. And she wrote, she was just really beautiful what she wrote, right? So when I receive those messages, like, I never take them for granted. I really sit with them. And I use them to fuel me, right? So it's like this gas tank kind of, right? Like, it's like empty, and then, like, I start getting these messages, or there's these people I meet, and everything's always feels real intentional with me. And those messages, that's like my refuel, right? So I hope that answers that.
Yeah.
That's good.
And wine.
No, definitely. definitely.
Y una bailadita.
Yeah, I mean.
So you definitely have like a strong personality, and you seem like a person that's very, very sure of yourself and have always known certain things. And it's wonderful to hear your story.
And I'll say this, this was before I had just filed for the nonprofit. And it was really hard to file because I just kept doubting myself, right? I look at the paperwork and then I felt like, oh, somebody else needs to help me fill it out, and I need an expert, or I need an attorney, like all these things, right? And then finally, Jamal, who sits on my board, he was introduced to me, and Cheche, who introduced me to him, said, you'll know in 20 minutes, like, whether Jamal or you are vibing or not. And then we met, and it was like a 2-hour meeting. And I'll never forget Jamal saying, like, don't come back until you've filed for your nonprofit. Like
Just
like
that.
straight up accountability, right? And after I filed, I still felt like, I don't think I can do this. And I reached out to Denise Hernandez, and I said, hey, you have some time, will you meet with me? And we sat down, and I remember her saying, if you have ideas, if you have anything that you don't want someone else to use, like, you need to make sure you have a contract or an agreement. And I remember thinking, like, no, hombre, like, I don't need all that.
Right.
And then I had to learn the hard way, right? Like, oh, shit, that was my idea, and there's capital to that. And, man, it's really not mine anymore.
Wow.
Dang.
I would say, like, everything that's happened, it gives you, like, a thicker skin to, be able to, whatever you can take, that you can absorb, you can do it. But whatever you need to, like, slide off, you can just slide it off. But it's a new process, too, like doing a nonprofit, doing something that has to do with contracts.
Yeah.
In a new world, probably, too.
Yeah.
I assume probably out of your wheelhouse in a lot of ways. So through the experience comes learning lessons that are not pleasant, for sure.
Yeah, and I think giving ourselves permission, right?
Yeah.
Like giving ourselves permission to say, like, hey, it may not be perfect, or I made mistakes along the way. And I think it all circles back to how we lift each other up and keeping that real.
Yeah, I think that for me, that's what I take is anytime you do something, like, no one is perfect, but voice out your opinion, voice out your idea, because then whenever you don't voice it out, whenever you don't voice out your thought, you're gonna feel like I should have done it.
Speaking about doing more and doing things, can we get into some of the events and opportunities
The Latino Art
also-
Weekend.
That was last year in June, right?
That was in November.
November. It's close enough. No.
I know.
November 2021.
Yep.
November 2021, yes, Latino Art Weekend.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, let's talk about Latino Art Weekend. So Latino Art Weekend, it is my baby. I was introduced to Steven, Rudy, and Tobar, who are of color. So that is a pretty new organization here in Austin. And when they reached out to me, they shared with me that they were doing this Black Art Weekend, and it was this experience. They are, I believe, Steven and Tobar are both from Chicago, and Rudy, I believe, is Philly. I'm not sure. And anyhow, when we jumped on this call, they talked to me about Black Art Weekend, and I remember them saying, like, we're going to sell, like, tickets, and people are going to come experience art. And I thought they were crazy. I was like, oh, okay, well, this should be interesting. Like, Austin is not, honestly, like an art city like Houston, right? So they asked me, they're like, well, do you want to come and shadow Black Art Weekend? And ideally, what we'd like to do is invite you to mirror that for the Latino community.
Wow.
Nice.
And like we heard, you're the person that can help us make that happen. So I went to Black Art Weekend, and it was really beautifully done. It had great energy. And I started working on Latino Art Weekend with them. I became the project manager, and essentially it became like my vision of what I thought represented Latinos here in Austin. Because I knew like this was a huge opportunity, right? They were helping fund it. MAS Cultura. We had not gone public yet. So they had some funding. And so for me it was like, let me see how much, how many opportunities I can create through this. I ended up helping them selecting the venues. And then I booked all the music. So, and then I worked with the artists, which was, probably the most important part. So there were 65 artists that participated in Latino Art Weekend through the work that I've been doing now for a few years, even before MAS Cultura gave birth. I recruited and had 58 of those 65 artists were all artists that I brought into the event. The majority of the artists had never exhibited. So that was really huge. But yeah, I came up with the concept of like the exhibit names. And then, of course, I organized the Lowrider Car Show at the Male House. So the entire event itself, right, like it really was bringing my vision to life. And it really reflected a lot of my experiences of like from Phoenix and from Cali. So I love California. And so between like going to Cali, Phoenix, it was Latino Art Weekend. Like I remember standing back, and I had a lot of moments at Latino Art Weekend. Like when we talk about special moments, I remember standing back at the Mala House and being like, I did this. Like my work is done. You know, Latino Art Weekend was really, really special to me. I poured blood, sweat, and tears into it. I mean, I think at some moment I thought like I'm going to lose my job over this event because I was like sleeping, eating, dreaming, breathing Latino Art Weekend. If you imagine like curating an exhibit and there were 60 artists at some point that I was dealing with.
Wow.
It's crazy, yeah.
And
It's a big scope of work.
yes. So I'm very grateful, you know, that Of Color approached me and, you know, extended the invitation to me to do Latino Art Weekend, the inaugural Latino Art Weekend. So it was a really special event. It's really dear to my heart. I know that there will be a Latino Art Weekend this year as well. And then, you know, whether or not like I'm part of it this year, that still has not been determined.
And that question, were there all local artists, Latino?
And one of the things that we ended up doing was extending it regionally.
Okay.
So we brought arte y artists from Del Rio, El Paso, Juarez, right? And the idea behind that was we really wanted to show Austin art that was very, you know, in your face when it comes to cultura, because they do not compromise, right? Ideally, like for me, and this is not one day, like this is going to happen. Like we will have artists from Mexico City here doing murals, right?
Nice.
Like that is what and collaborating with artists here. Because I think that's something, like it just goes to another level because the artists inspire each other. It brings out the best in one another. And like creatively, I just think it's just a stronger force. So when we invited those artists, it was like, hey, if we already know that the opportunities in Austin are very limited. And so what does it look like for us to invite artists in Texas that can come and exhibit here, and that eventually the artists from Austin get invited to their cities so that it's an exchange, right? So, and building on that.
A lot of the times, what you said earlier makes a lot of sense. When you bring artists together, one artist is going to motivate the other artist to do better. I take that for heart because as I started doing photography, I'm blessed to be surrounded by people that are good. But like you said, like it motivates you to create more. But
I think, too, one of the things I really appreciated and was really happy that we decided to invite artists from outside of Austin is there was an artist that participated in Latino Art Weekend, and I remember her telling me, like, this was before, like, she brought her pieces in. I remember her telling me that she had come to a point in her art career where she felt that she was doing a lot of commission work and that she was really had been put in this box, and she was having a really hard time stretching herself out of that box.
Right.
And when I shared with her, like, hey, like, these are the other artists that are going to, like, this is going to be a place, like, whatever you want to paint that's represents you as a Latina, cultura, this is where you're going to be able to do that. And I think that because we brought those artists in that are really confident in delivering this art that says, hey, you know, I'm Chicano, or Viva la Raza, or whatever it is, I think that made other artists, and it encouraged other artists for sure.
That's good.
That's wonderful. Speaking of pieces of art, I know you brought some for us today. Do you care to show them and kind of
It was your
talk about
first
it?
piece of art when you
Yes.
acquired at the age of 14.
I was like, somebody did their homework. I was like,
we were waiting for the moment to plug it in.
Yes. The first time I was really introduced to art, I got a job at Jovitas. So Jovitas is a restaurant was on South First. So I think for me, I'm going to kind of rewind. So there's basically like three major influences, right? As far as like my love for art and how I was introduced to it. One of them definitely is Jovitas, right? Jovitas, you know, I went to work there when I was a teenager. He was like, hey, you know, what are you? And I'm like, what am I, Mexicana? And he's like, oh, no, like, oh, so you're born in Mexico? And I'm like, no, I was born in San Antonio. And he's like, oh, no, you're Chicana. And then he's like, oh, if you want to work here, like, you got to read this book. And he hands me a book, and it's called 500 Years of Chicano History.
Wow.
And so he hands me the book, and I get the job. And then that was the first time, like, you know, I started seeing murals being created by Chicanos there at Jovitas. So that was a major influence in my passion for art, introduction to it. And then I grew up, the neighborhood I grew up in, that's where La Resistencia bookstore was at. Okay. So Raul Salinas, who's an activist. And so when I was a kid, you know, I'd go into the bookstore, and I usually, you know, didn't have money for a book, but they had postcards there all the time. And they were on the counter, you know, as you got rang up. So I purchased one of my very first pieces of art, quote unquote, which was a postcard there. I did bring it. So it's this.
Show it.
So it's this. So it's this little card right here. It's been in the same frame forever.
Wow.
My kids are probably like, yes, that's been in every single apartment, house, garage, or wherever we've lived at. So this is the card, the postcard, and I framed it, and so it's super dear to me. And so that's this piece, which is definitely a big part of, you know, my story. And then we finally moved out of the neighborhood. So we moved out of the neighborhood.
I could take a picture of it and show it.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. So we moved out of the neighborhood, and we moved into these apartments. And this is kind of a funny, interesting story, I guess. And so we lived on the ground floor, and we had a neighbor. And the neighbor would always sit out on his patio to smoke a cigarette or maybe mota and drink black coffee. And he was definitely, like, weird. Like, he had...
Or he was probably just high.
He had tattoos, and he had those big earrings, like when they stretch their ear.
The gauges.
The gauges. Yes, the gauges, right. And but I was so intrigued by him. And then finally one day, like, I approached him, and I was like, oh, like, you know, where do you get this stuff done? And he's like, oh, I work at Forbidden Fruit. And I was like, oh, okay. And anyhow, he kind of became like my friend. You know,
I have a question. What's Forbidden Fruit?
And he was definitely kind of, you know, he was definitely different. And then, of course, my mom's like, ay, no hables y ese loco. And, you know, the typical.
Protectora, madre superprotectora, yeah.
And one day I was coming out of the apartment, and he goes, my neighbor upstairs just moved out. He goes, and she left a bunch of art in the laundromat. And you should walk over there and see if you like any of it. Mm. And so I walked over there, and I grabbed 2 pieces. And I must have been 14 years old. I was definitely 14 years old. And so the pieces, they're made out of chalk. So she used chalk on them. And I still have both of them. So I did not pay for those, you know, but those definitely, like, I consider, like, part of my collection. And I brought one of those. So yeah, that was another big influence in my life as far as just, like, introduction to art and collecting art. I have a lot of art. I kind of tease my kids, and I'm like, yeah, like, when I die, like, you're not going to get, like, any fancy jewelry or anything. You're just going to get all this art.
This art.
The third piece that is really dear to me in my collection, and I should have brought it. So I worked for this lady, Paula Brunson, who is a lady who just kept bringing me music. I was like, listen to this and listen to this, right? She invited me to her house one day, and I went in the restroom, and she had this piece of art. It was on actually a piece of cardboard above the toilet. And I noticed it as soon as I walk in, and it's like this lime green, and it's got a low rider, and it's got, like, the mom, the dad, and the little girl sitting in the car like this.
Family unit.
A family unit. And I was like, man, Paula, that's so dope. Like, where did you get that from, right? And she's like this gringa. And she was, oh, I used to work, like, you know, in college or whatever, like, at this gallery in San Francisco. And that's one of the pieces. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then that was that. And then finally one day I moved out of my mom's garage, and I got my own apartment. And it was like a super big deal.
Of course. Big deal.
Right? And she goes, hey, I have a housewarming gift for you. And it was that piece.
Nice.
And so I took that piece, and I remember going to, like, Hobby Lobby, or I'm pretty sure it was Hobby Lobby, and getting it framed. Right. And I knew, like, that was like a actual investment. That's when I learned, like, oh, matting and framing, it costs money.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Custom matting. Because I immediately knew, like, the color I wanted to mat it, which was like a silver. And so that piece is in my collection as well. But, yeah, I definitely have a lot of art. It's like a mini gallery, I guess, when you come into my home. This morning I talked to an artist. This is actually, and he goes, I haven't made it unless I have a piece of my art hanging in your house. And I'm like, wow, okay. And then he's like, and I swear, if you have a piece of so-and-so hanging in your house and not in mine. And it was just so funny, right? And I was like, no, I don't have his art hanging. And, yeah, I have a lot of pieces that at this point, like, I've ran out of wall space. I have a lot of art stored. But, yeah, these are two out of the three pieces that definitely, like, if it ever came down to, hey, you got to give it all up, and what are you going to keep? It would be like those three pieces.
That's the chalk one, right?
Those artists just generally just give you art? Do they ask you, hey, do you want a piece?
Yeah,
whenever
let's
you
talk.
meet 'em?
We can talk about that. So this was actually in a different frame. And when I moved to Phoenix, I remember I was like, I got to get it in a new frame. And I took it to, you know, either Hobby Lobby or Michael's. You know, I'm not getting paid for this, so.
Me either, no worries.
Hobby Lobby. And then I remember being so scared of taking it out of the frame, because I was like, what if, like, the chalk is stuck to the glass? And I had all these crazy ideas of, like, I'm about to ruin it. And then I was like, no, it needs a new frame. I just have to do it. And I did it. But before I put it in this frame, like, I sealed it. So if I ever have to take it out of that.
Easier, less damage, potential
I
damage.
will.
It looks like it's signed too at the corner,
Yeah,
right?
it's signed. I have no idea who it is.
Oh, wow.
It's the friend of the neighbor.
Some hippie lady that lived upstairs from the neighbor.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely, all the art has stories. I have I mean, I can honestly say that I'm just been really, really blessed with the artists that I've met. There's so many. I have an art piece that was gifted to me during Latino Art Weekend that came very unexpected. It came from Ramon Maldonado. He's a Chicano activist. He actually painted the mural that is at Chicano Park now. Mm-hmm. And he came to Latino Art Weekend. I had extended him the invitation to participate, and he did not reply. And I was like, okay, Ramon is not participating. And he showed up at Latino Art Weekend when we were doing the install.
Nice.
So he shows up. True story. He came in with the video camcorder. And he's like, oh, I want to check this out. And so some of the artists were there dropping off their pieces. We were starting to install. He was walking around. He was recording. And then he disappeared. And then he shows up a few hours later. And he goes, I brought a piece for the art show. And I go, oh, all right, thank you. I appreciate it. So he hangs up the piece. We hang up the piece. And when he came to pick it up, well, before he came to pick it up, I did a tour where I brought kids from Dove Springs. I got them carpooled to Latino Art Weekend. And thank you, Lara Razo, who sits on my board, because she helped organize that, and Cynthia Vasquez, to a Dove Springs resident, East Austin native. And we brought these kids in to tour the art, and he video cameraed that too with the recorder. I mean, I don't know what you call him with the VHS tape, but he did his thing, right? Nice. And that after that, he returned, and I said, well, can you tell me about the piece you brought? Right. And he said, yeah, sure. And he goes, well, I just want to tell you something first. I'm like, yeah, what's up? Right. He goes, well, I never reply to your messages. And he goes, because I don't know how to read.
Oh.
And I said, I didn't know that, Ramon. Well, I appreciate you taking time and coming. And, you share with me about the art piece that you're contributing to this exhibit. And he tells me that art piece, it's on wood, that he actually had gifted it to Zavala Elementary. And the art piece got lost, and it never was shown. And so the piece was lost for 40 years.
Wow.
And when the school underwent renovations, they mysteriously found it in a closet. And they returned it to him. Wow. So that was the piece that he had at Latino Art Weekend. When he came back to pick up the art piece, he gifted me that art piece.
Nice.
Wow.
So I have it, and so eventually I will find a home where it will, where the story can be told. And obviously it is part of preserving our cultura.
MAS Cultura.
And MAS Cultura. And that's just one of so many. It's like MAS Cultura is bigger than me, right? I mean,
it is.
And honestly, it is, because
there's
it just happens. And, and I was like, wow, God, you're really using me. And we're just a vehicle for it.
And that's a pretty cool story.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Lost
I think that's one of the deepest story we've had in the podcast.
There's so much, and what it all comes down to is if we actually take time to talk to people and just be tell me about you and your story, which is something that you're doing through this podcast, right? So in a way, you're preserving too, because one day, I won't be here, and this will be part of my story, and people who want to learn about me will have this podcast. So I also commend you for the work that you're doing through, Otra por favor.
Otra por favor.
Yes.
That we are doing.
Yes, that you're doing. But I'm like, I want to know, like, who are the artists? Where are they at? What is their story? And so, you know, the artists that were part of Latino Art Weekend, the 50 plus artists that, you know, I brought to that event, like, that was not an accident, right? That was like at some point, I remember being on this Hispanic Latino group and like learning and reading about artists y todo eso. And anyhow, part of Latino Art Weekend was having the car show and the lowrider bikes. And so I had signed someone up for a lowrider bike. Well, they filled out the little form. And so, oh, here's your confirmation. You know, you'll be participating, blah, blah, blah. And then a few days later, my Instagram phone is ringing. And I was like, oh, I didn't know you could call people through Instagram. This is kind of weird. And I take the call. I was at work and she had already tried calling me like twice. And I was like, okay. And so I step outside of my office to answer. And I'm like, hey, I was like, I got all your stuff. Is everything okay? And she's like crying. And I'm like, no, like you're registered, right?
You're
like
good.
Your bike's registered. We're good. Is everything okay? And she goes, well, I have all this. You're doing an art show. And I go, yeah, like that's part of it, Latino Art Weekend. And she's like, well, I have a lot of art. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And she goes, well, it's not my art. She goes, it's my uncle's art. I go, oh, okay, I see. And she goes, and I know you can help me. And I go, okay. Well, like, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, what do you mean? And she goes, I really need your help. She's like, and you're the only person that I know, like, can do it. And I go, well, I'm at work right now, but I'll text you when I get off. Then when that happens, I asked her to send me some pictures. Before she sends me the pictures, we jump on a phone call, and she tells me that the art belonged to her uncle who had passed away from COVID in September, and it was like November, you know, or earlier that year. Sorry, I don't remember exactly when, but that he had passed away from COVID, and that he was amputated, so he was wheelchair bound, and he had rescued her from foster care, and that her whole life she had been by his side while he created art. And at some point, she's like, you know, as a kid, like I would carry his art and help him set up, and he would do these pop-ups like in green and New Braunfels. And they live between here and San Antonio. She's like, you know, as a kid, I would help my uncle set up these pop-ups, and he passed away, and he left me all this art. And she's like, I just don't know what to do with it. And I said, and of course, the empath in me is like, yes, I'll help you, right? And I go, well, I really need to see the art first. And she sends me the first picture, and as soon as she sent it to me, like I knew immediately that he was talented. And she starts sending me more, and I go, okay. I said, I'm going to help you. And I said, and you know, he can participate in Latino Art Weekend. And she's like bawling. And she's like, you know, all he ever wanted was for people to see his art. And he wanted it in a gallery. And so they invited me to the home. I drove to the little town. And, you know, they live in this trailer park area. I showed up, and there was just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of art. Wow. And I remember thinking, how am I going to pick which pieces to show at Latino Art Weekend? So I kind of had to step back, look at it, and then, you know, I did end up picking out some pieces. And so Latino Art Weekend was, yeah, he was there in spirit, and we sold some of his pieces. I think I have 2 left because we ended up taking 6 of them and exhibiting them.
Man, it was kind of like we had a question to ask, like, what would you do to change the world? But you already answered that. like, and I think for us, it's just like continue to, you know, to create.
Yeah, I think it's create opportunities, right? It's like if we have an opportunity, then it's like how do we then extend that, right?
Yeah.
And like we don't just keep it to ourselves.
Right.
And I hope that I hope that people know that if I'm given the opportunity, I'm gonna find a way to then like extend that to someone.
That's good. That's good. I'm shocked and awed by everything that you're saying.
Right.
And
It's been a captivating conversation. Really, the more I hear the stories that you shared with us so far, I wonder how many people are out there that have those pieces hidden that are just waiting for that opportunity, waiting to be connected, or that story that needs to be told. So it's kind of wonderful, and I think it's like magical in a way when you talk about these examples throughout your life and throughout your work, that you've given someone that, or shown someone that door to showcase their passion.
The hidden gems. Yep.
And we have stuff coming up.
Talk about it. Tell me what's going on.
So I have a series that I'm starting called Café y Cositas.
okay.
And the idea with that is bringing the señoras together.
Las comadres.
Las comadres, las señoras, tías, primas, and tóxicas too, okay?
We are all
inclusive.
We're all
There you go.
inclusive here.
Okay?
There you go.
Okay? So anyhow.
Café Cositas.
Café y cositas.
Con las tóxicas.
As long as the café is not toxic.
There we go.
Oh my goodness.
This café's good.
Okay, tenga
good.
piquete.
We're,
we're good.
giving them space to fellowship, to build community, create also. So we'll be having like local Latina creatives come in. Like there's Melissa with 13 Cookies that's going to come and do like cookie decorating. Valerie, who's going to do like make earrings out of clay or something. There's a lot of stuff, but eventually the whole idea, we're starting it in Dove Springs. We definitely want to grow it into those other areas that we know there's a need. But we'll start the Café Cositas there, and then our ultimate goal is to have a Dia de los Muertos in Dove Springs, right? Because we just know, like, the señoras are never going to get on the bus and go downtown for a Dia de los Muertos festivities. So we will then, through that series, start creating things that we will use for Dia de los Muertos.
Oh, that's good.
So that's one thing. I have an exhibit that we're just working on confirming the date. We have a location for it, and that will be an art exhibit inspired by prison art. Of course, it is a little bit tricky because we want to make sure, like, it's not inmates that have that are violent offenders against women or children. But then we also will have, just in general, like people who've been affected by the system, incarceration, and then the style of that art, right? So we will have this exhibit. It's going to be hella dope. The exhibit will happen, and then a proceeds of the art that is sold through that exhibit is going to go to an organization who works with youth that are at risk and their parents have or are incarcerated. So that's going to be our gift back for that.
You don't have a date for that, you said yet.
So we have 2 dates that we're working with right now, but as soon as I have it, like, we're going to start promoting it for sure, to make sure that anyone who's interested in participating can. So that is like one of the exhibits that I'm really looking forward to. There is an activation right now. It is a Spurs mural that's at Native Hostel. It's got a QR code on there. So I am really proud of that project. That was a project that I had to sign a confidentiality agreement on, and I couldn't talk about it. But that project, like, I submitted several artists. I'm going to be really honest. I didn't think we were going to get it. I was just like, we're MAS Cultura. Like, we just don't have that much, we don't have a really solid resume, but let's do it. And I'm just going to say, like, I'm really proud of the Spurs because they selected the one art piece that was proposed that definitely embraces cultura. I mean, it's got, like, ballet folklorico, mariachi hat, and I was like, okay, well, hello, native in East Austin. Like, we're bringing this mural to you. Are you ready for it? And everyone's been awesome, great. Amado Castillo is the artist. He's an Austin native. And the mural went up, and they just a few days ago during South by, they announced that you can win tickets. So you take a selfie with the mural, you scan the code, and you have a chance to win tickets. So that was a mural that was organized by MAS Cultura, and then the artist is Amado Castillo. But that's like huge for us, right, to have been commissioned for that mural from the Spurs.
Nice. That's good.
And
That's the one
more.
that I see.
Wonderful.
There's more. This one's really important.
No,
This
please,
one's
please.
really important. Okay, this one's really important because we did this last year and it was community funded, and this year it more than likely will be too. So I am throwing that out there. Like, we have to invest in our communities, and that is one of the things that MAS Cultura, as you know, we grow as an organization, that we definitely want to promote, like Latino philanthropy in cultural arts. Like, if we want to see more Latino events, more cultural arts, like, we need to invest in that.
Yeah.
So there was a campaign we did last year, and it turned out to be really, really beautiful. And it is done during Mental Health Awareness. It was community funded, which to me says a lot about that. Hey, we do care about mental health awareness. And it is the only mural that is in Spanish. And it says, "Tú importas." Right? And for that mural, Felix Jaime snuck one, first generation. Also, he and I worked on that mural. And it ended up being a community collaboration where other artists came and helped us with it. And the mural is at the corner of Ben White and South Congress. So that was last year. So we will be doing that mural again, Tú Importas. It will be a different design, obviously, inspired by the artist that gets selected. And the goal is to put that mural in North Austin, right? So we're looking for walls, you know, the funding siempre. Pero the wall, high visibility wall, everything's intentional. Like, we want to make sure it's high traffic, that it's going to make an impact in the community. So that mural will be happening this summer, the Tú Importas.
Okay.
The ultimate dream is that campaign grows, kind of like the You're Not Alone campaign has grown nationally. So for me, like, putting that mural in Isla Paz, you know, other little towns that have a Latino population. Right now, we're on Instagram. So, MAS Cultura.
MAS Cultura.
MAS Cultura. MAS. Queremos más, right? MAS Cultura. And we're hoping, like, within the next 90 days that we have the website. But definitely follow us on Instagram, because we will be putting out that call on, like, hey, who's interested in being on our team? Yeah, we're looking for talent, skills, or if you just want to shadow, want to be mentored. We also encourage people who are, like, highly skilled professionals, like, to get involved and mentor some of the youth and emerging artists as well.
That's awesome.
That's good.
We are tax deductible now. We're recognized by the IRS officially as a nonprofit. So, you know, if you make a donation, it is tax deductible. And even more important than that, it puts us, it gives us the opportunity, to start applying for grants and to start going after some of that funding.
Good.
Sí, yo creo que para mí lo más importante con MAS Cultura es que la comunidad se sienta apoyada, y si tienen ideas, que por favor nos marquen, y estamos aquí para servirles. Y esa es neta, mi palabra.
Well said.
Yep.
That's perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, well, thank you, Monica, for
Thank you so
for being
much
here.
for
Thank
coming
you,
out.
My ears are burning.
Yeah, no worries. And thank you for listening to another episode of Otra, por favor.
Por favor.
Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Otra,
En
por
YouTube,
favor.
ahí estamos también.
And yeah, just let us know. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And if you want to go ahead and connect and volunteer, hit up Monica. She's gonna respond, and I'm pretty sure you're gonna not regret that decision to volunteer.
MAS Cultura.
Hey, cuídense,
Cultura.
se portan bien y adiós. Esto es Otra, por favor. This is one more.